Next bill, item G, Senate Bill 198 by the Senator from Berkeley and others, the Senator from Edgefield for the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. S-198 is a resolution that would make South Carolina's call for a convention of states to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution for three purposes. Those you already hit your button. Oh, you got your. Okay.
You got you, Pat.
198 would allow for would authorize a call for the purpose of imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, would limit the power and the jurisdiction of the federal government, and to limit the terms of office for its officials. And those are the three areas to which this resolution is limited. We had extensive testimony, Mr. Chairman, at the subcommittee level. We had, I think, three meetings on this resolution, and we probably heard about 3.5 hours worth of testimony. And I'll say, let me add on this one too, on 198, there are, this exact resolution is pending in 25 other states, and 3 states have already passed it. Georgia, Florida, and Alaska have passed it, and then there are 25 others for which it is pending.
The subcommittee makes a favorable recommendation.
I'm sorry, the subcommittee did recommend favorable.
Senator from Orangeburg.
Chairman, I'm going to make a blanket statement here that I'm opposed to a constitutional convention, and these next 3 bills are going to get minority reports, and so we can talk about them a lot or we can move forward, but I just assume we go ahead and vote on them because I don't think there's any chance that any 3 of these bills are going to pass, and I don't know there's any need for us to debate it at great length here. I think there's a good many of us who are against the Constitutional Convention. I know there's some that are for it, but the President Pro Tem has asked us to be mindful about bringing bills to the floor that really just aren't going to go anywhere. These bills aren't going to go anywhere. I mean, but I know people want to vote on them, so I just tell you, rather than debate it at length, I suggest we go ahead and carry them over. But if you don't want to carry them over, let's just go ahead and put minority reports on them and finish the meeting.
All right, Senator from Charleston, Senator Kempson.
Sure.
You mentioned that a number of states have already passed this resolution.
On this one, 198, 3 states have passed this one. The next one, S30, which deals only with the balanced budget, 25 states have passed that one. But 3 have passed this one, and it's pending in 25.
Is there a requisite number of states that have to pass this in order to have a constitutional convention?
I think under the call is being made pursuant to Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, which would require 34 states to pass it. And if 34 states pass the call, then the Congress would be required to do that.
So, 3 states have passed it.
This one.
This one, so that you'd have to have another 31 states to pass.
Right.
This one.
30 after us.
Have a convention.
That's right.
How would the delegates be selected for the convention? I'm just curious.
We would pass a resolution or a bill detailing that. And in fact, we had some discussion about that because when Georgia passed theirs, they also passed legislation that set out how the delegates would be selected, how many delegates they would have, provisions for recall of the delegates, penalties if the delegates did not follow instructions, those type things. And in all candor, I decided at this point, in talking with Senator Grooms, who's a primary sponsor, I decided to let's pick one fight at a time right now. When we get this one passed, then we'll deal with the delegate selection at that point. Because as you indicated, we still got to have another 30 states to have the call. So we're going to have a little bit of time in order to figure out that process.
I have a number of other questions, but in light of the Senator from Orangeburg's statements, I'll reserve those if they become relevant.
All right, Senator from Williamsburg, and then Senator Moore Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of some of the discussion already, I withhold it.
Senator Moore Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Will Senator from Edgefield yield for a question?
Sure.
And I'm going to just jump around to 31.
Okay.
To the third one. As I understand, and tell me if I missed something, I don't think I did, but as I understand that the United States Supreme Court has agreed to take up several cases on certiorari to settle that issue about marriage being, or basically the considering various states' ban on gay marriage.
That's my understanding, yes, sir.
And that case is now pending.
That's right. I mean, my understanding is that it should be decided by June.
So, isn't it, wouldn't you say that this, based on where we are right now, that I guess we would say that it is not right for a constitutional convention because we don't know what the United States Supreme Court is going to do.
I mean, I think you could certainly make that argument. We had some discussion at our subcommittee as to whether we would carry over that specific one. And I mean, there were some issues that I had questions about that I would be interested in some testimony on. And that was one thing that I was interested in too. But there was support, and I voted to move it along for a discussion at this level too. But I do think that's a concern that we ought to consider, that the Supreme Court does have cases pending before it that it should decide within the next few months.
So we're talking about calling for a constitutional convention on something we don't even know that we're going to need a constitutional convention about. Is that about right?
Potentially.
Okay.
Senator from Spartanburg.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The discussion that we had a little bit was the fact that this Senate does move slowly, and having this on the floor is not a passed bill. And as the former pro tem used to say about the slip between a cup and a lip, there's a huge gap there, much less a little bit of a opportunity for it not to pass. But what I wanted to do at the committee level, in which we agreed at the subcommittee level, was to have a vote to at least let the folks in South Carolina know that we do have a plan if the federal government, chooses to continue to thwart the will of the people of South Carolina. And on the other side, it would be nice to have this moving through our legislature to show the Supreme Court at least where South Carolina stands. Now, I know that we haven't had the courage in our judiciary that they've had in Alabama, but I would like to be able to show there's some courage in the Senate to at least get this to the floor. So I would like to have a vote at the committee level, and it can be voted down. I mean, it's the will of the committee, and I'm just one. But to say that it would be, we're not ripe and now's not the time, I don't think that 80% of South Carolinians that voted to protect marriage are going to understand that argument, but it's one you can make.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Senator from Moore Reed.
Yes.
I mean, hasn't South Carolina already spoken on this issue by when we passed as a state, we passed that ban already?
Yes, we passed the ban, but the federal government said that our ban didn't matter. So now, through this,
But my question is, don't you think that our state has already spoken, and we have done what we could do, and we said we let our voice be heard loud and clear?
well, as the federal government, as our federal officials elected have the power to remove federal judges, but have not shown that power through the Article 5, we could show this power in stating that we can make a change to what's going on at the federal level through the Article 5.
Well, Senator from Edgefield.
Mr. Chairman, I actually have an amendment that I wanted to offer on S31 when we got to that point, but I guess unless there's, in light of what the senator from Orangeburg, his opening blast, I mean, I would move for just not to prolong this matter. I mean, I would move for a favorable report of S198.
Well, let me ask you this: what is the wisdom of, and I am a little bit concerned about the calendar. What is the wisdom of sending, and I don't know how the votes are going to go, sending three resolutions out versus one? What is the wisdom behind that?
Well, I actually, Mr. Chairman, I actually think that 198 would cover the other two. I think 198 is limited, but the subject matter, imposing physical restraints on the federal government, that would certainly encompass the balanced budget portion. I think limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, I think that would encompass the marriage issue. Because, and I'll say, generally what my thought on S31 was, and we talked about this some at the subcommittee level, but 198 and 30 are attempting to limit the powers of the federal government and move those to the states to some degree. I think S31 kind of moves in the opposite direction. It would set out a U.S. constitutional amendment defining marriage, and I think that has always been a state issue in my mind. I don't think it's a constitutional issue.
You think
I
there's
think
a
it's a
way to
state
deal
issue.
with it without
Well,
there being
my
a constitutional amendment?
I mean, at the U.S. Supreme Court, the federal judiciary is making it a constitutional issue.
Right.
Right. My proposal on that would be, if we got to that point, I was going to offer an amendment that the call would be not to establish an amendment that defines marriage, but just to say that it is the authority of the several states to define and regulate marriage within their borders, because I think that's the way that it has been forever. And I understand there's going to be opposition to that too. I get that. But in any event, I also understand what the senator from Orangeburg said. I understand what you've just said about whether we need 3 of them. I think 198 offers the opportunity to address S30 and S31, that same subject matter. 198 covers all of it,
Right.
in my mind. But
Mr. Chair.
Senator from Darlington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Judiciary Committee, our fellow senators. It hasn't been that long ago. The senator from Charleston, Senator Campson, may recall that he and I were stuck in a room for a period of time. There may have been others, and we crafted the language that would go on the constitutional amendment, and we reserved the ability to contract. It was a really taxing day in the Senate when we were going to make certain that this was going to be something that would go forth here in the state of South Carolina. As we have evolved over time, and folks have, it seems as though that the tendencies have been gone now to, in the federal government, wherever, that there is a choice. And as my daddy would say, he refers me oftentimes to the book of Romans in the first chapter, the 26th to the 32nd verse, and says, how you going to act and what are you going to do? And he says, y'all have a right to your choices. You just don't have a right to your consequences. And so when we're going forward with this, what I would ask that we end up doing and encourage us to do is that when we set our priorities here in this Senate for our state, we're setting our priorities in an interesting way. This is not one of my priorities, is to try to act before someone else acts. And I understand that we all may be a little bit different. But when we start moving things toward a special order in light of the conversation that's going on here, we still got roads that we haven't put in priority status that we got to end up addressing. We still got matters that we're concerned with, many with our schools that are Abbeville and others, wherever you fall down to it, we got to have that discussion in our state. We got a budget that's going to end up coming. I think that what we are seeing now is that if we're going to prioritize, and if these matters go forth, then we're going to spend a lot of time. We still got the ethics bill, if that's going to be considered. We still haven't fully addressed the issues with South Carolina State. We got the House that has not addressed the bond bill that was in the budget. It's not going to come over, so we got a lot of things that we got to address there. I would hope that as we go forward that we decide how we're going to prioritize. If this goes in, I think that we sort of know where we all stand individually. We sort of know what's going on with the Supreme Court. Is that we can have this issue and have a debate. It could be a long debate, but I just don't want. I'm happy to engage in the debate and discussion. I just don't want it to get in front of the things that we need for our state, the roads, the education issues and those kind of things, and that is going to happen. And so I'm not going to be participating in this very long. The senator from Orangeburg has already said he's going to put a minority report on it. I'm going to vote present because I'm not going to waste my time going through this over and over and over again. I get it on the Senate floor. We'll have a discussion there, but we're going to have this discussion here. It's not going to make much sense.
Senator from Sumter.
Just a few things, Mr. Chairman, and I agree with the senator from Darlington. You know, the whole this whole Convention of States movement was not on my radar. I don't think it's on my district's radar, really. What my people in my district care about right now is funding the roads, possibly the ethics bill, and a number of other issues that face the state. But I have learned a lot about this because I was on the subcommittee. And I want to say a few of the things I said. I want to say a few things now that I said during the subcommittee. Number one, you know, I believe that this is still the greatest country in the world, which is governed by one of the greatest living, breathing documents in the history of the planet. And, you know, we've never gone this route as far as amending our Constitution. I think we got to be very careful when we talk about these things. And for me, a lot of questions at the subcommittee were not answered. I have questions, who are we going to send? Not just from this state, but from other states. And I hear comments like in Indiana, a law was passed where if the delegate didn't do exactly what the General Assembly wanted the delegate to do, there was criminal penalties. That may exist in some states, but not others. You know, at the subcommittee, those are the reasons why I voted against every one of these initiatives except for S30. And I'm looking at this chart we have in front of us, Mr. Chairman. It seems that there is a bit of a groundswell in America for this S30 initiative, which is the balanced budget initiative. And that doesn't give me as much heartburn because, you know, here in South Carolina, we balance our budget every year. And I think there is a lot of frustration in my district and in others about the fact that federal spending has gotten out of control. I don't disagree with that. Of course, when we think about our balanced budget here in South Carolina, we don't have to fight wars. So there's a little bit of a difference there. But with that being said, you know, the federal government, they can balance their budget. I worked there in 1997. They did it. There just has to be the will to do that. And so I don't know if this is the route to do it. The balanced budget amendment does not give me the heartburn the other ones do because I just don't see the groundswell of support. And if we're talking about if we're talking about trying to amend the Constitution via Article 5 every time we have a social issue that concerns us, I think we're headed down a dangerous precedent there. Senator from Ori mentioned earlier, I mean, as far as S31, the train's kind of left the station. And, you know, I tend to agree that when it comes to marriages should be governed by the states. But if you look at this, in my opinion, S31 is asking for something that a lot of us say we don't even want. So these give me great pause. Like I said, I don't have the issues with S30 because I do think that it's narrowly tailored to say just a balanced budget amendment. That doesn't bother me as much as the other ones do, but I just worry about this thing getting out of control when I don't know who we're sending and I don't know what their agendas may be. That concerns me.
Senator from Fairfield.
Government send us letters about our unfunded mandates. We're not going to do anything about it because we can't.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator from Greenville. Senator Corbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to hold these remarks until the next bill about Article 5, but I may, based on what the conversation here, I may not be, it may not even get to a vote. What I wanted to say to the committee was, this federal government, these bills and what they're trying to achieve transcend political party. In my opinion, one of the greatest presidents ever was Ronald Reagan. And to the best of my knowledge, we ran a deficit under Ronald Reagan. And we have ran deficits in this country year after year after year after year. Now, we could get into the philosophy of how are we able to do that. Well, briefly, I'll just say, because we can print money. The United States currency is the global currency. If you want to exchange money throughout the world, you first exchange to U.S. currency and then to another. We're blessed in that regard. But what if one day the global currency changed and the United States currency wasn't the global currency and we were looking at these deficits? It would mean the instant ruin of this nation. And I say that to say that looking out for our national fiscal responsibility should transcend Republican, Democrat, Independent, or whatever, because the national debt has grown under all of our all the administrations. I read some months ago, and so don't hold me to the exact figure, but if we tried to pay off the national debt right now, it would be, I think, and I'm going from memory, and I just turned 50, but I think it would be around $43,000 per person. Now, that's not per taxpayer. That's not per head of household. That's per person. So I'm married and I have 2 children, so I would have to take $43,000 and multiply it by 4. That's over $170,000. And I would ask these young ladies behind the camera and the people out here who have come to watch this committee, and each one of us, do we have that kind of cash laying around if we had to suddenly pay off our debt? I think the answer would be a resounding no. I think that the majority of Americans are like the federal government. They're deeply in debt. I've read and researched, I don't have the stats in front of me. I didn't realize I'd have this opportunity today. But what I would like to convey to the committee is that before we make a judgment about these and just sort of disregard them, let's take a long, hard look at our nation and the debt, not only the federal government, but the debt that we're all in. And if you add all that up, it's in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. And like I say, we're currently blessed to be the nation's reserve fund. But there will come a point, I'm afraid, when the world will stop buying our bonds. And when that happens, the collapse will come. And ladies and gentlemen in the room, it will come overnight, and it will come swiftly, and it will come unexpectedly. And I would just ask that this committee at least take a serious look at what we can do in regards from our position to make this a priority for the federal government, to balance the budget. And this is just to balance the budget. This is not talking about paying down the $18 trillion in debt we have. It's occurred under Republicans and Democrats. So that's my financial speech for the day. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to try to be brief in the spirit of honoring what the Senator from Orangeburg recommended we do, which is wise. But just wanted to make a few points, and first of all, I spent a fair amount of time studying this last year because I got appointed subcommittee chairman at the very end of the year, but never had a subcommittee meeting because it was no way we could get anything done. But I did spend a fair amount of time studying it. And I really started from a position probably of not supporting an Article 5 convention because of 2 things. A concern about the convention being a, quote, runaway convention, and number 2, and most importantly, my concern about the state of American culture. I don't think that we have the same set of presuppositions and values, and most importantly, belief about human nature that the founders had. And I think the founders had human nature right. They greatly distrusted human nature. And if you don't, that's their number one guiding principle, really, when you look at the Constitution. I mean, that's what's behind the separation of powers doctrine. That's what's behind the Bill of Rights. That's what's behind federalism, where they created state and federal governments, each with authority in different areas. They did not trust people to wield concentrated political power. I mean, that is a resounding clear message that they have sent through the ages, and they got it right. They got it right, because it's the structure of government they created that preserves liberty. It's not faith in a person, a particular elected official. I think our culture has rejected that idea, or they're not even cognizant about it by and large, which is a shame. So I don't have a lot of, I'm concerned about the state of American culture and whether it would produce the type of document that the founders produced. So those are the concerns that I've had. But the more I studied this, the more I realized that this very same thinkers who I look to and love, like Madison and George Mason, who helped put the separation of powers doctrine and put those principles in the Constitution, looked at this as a means for the states to have some form of redress when the federal government becomes too powerful, when the balance of federalism is disrupted. I think on many fronts, it's pretty clear to me anyway that the balance of federalism has been disrupted by the federal government. And I'll quote Samuel Jones. He was a New York legislator. I think this was from the ratifying convention. And by the way, the founders, a lot of people say, we don't know what conventions are. I mean, conventions are ad hoc, organized groups in order to solve and address a political issue, and then they go away. And the founders had a lot of experience with conventions. The senator from Aiken 2 years ago sent me a book in the mail during the off season when we weren't in session, and it's called Ratification. It was a history of the ratification process in the states. Very, very interesting book, but it was done by conventions. I mean, the founders, the first Continental Congress was technically a convention. So when the founders created a convention and said this will be for this particular purpose, they had concrete examples of what they had in mind, that the conventions, and those conventions were limited to their purpose. In practice, they were. I mean, there weren't any runaway conventions in their experience. There was a lot of conventions throughout the colonial era and into the ratification of the federal Constitution. So if the federal judiciary would take that history and that precedence and really look for the original intent, which I doubt that they would, I'm afraid to say, but if they did, what they should do, they would limit a convention to what we say the convention should deal with in this resolution. But Samuel Jones says this: the reason why there are two modes of obtaining amendments prescribed in the Constitution, the first is the Congress proposing amendments, and the second is the Article 5 Convention of the States. The reason there are two modes, I suppose, to be this: it could not be known to the framers of the Constitution whether there was too much power given by it or too little. They therefore prescribed a mode by which Congress might procure more if in the operation of the government it was found necessary, and they prescribed for the states a mode of restraining the powers of the federal government if upon trial and error and experience it should be found necessary. And so that's the reason they gave the states a mechanism, because when they created the federal government, they didn't know how it was going to pan out. Now, I think it's panned out very well. But we also have seen, I mean, look at the federal debt situation, for example. We're almost 80% of the GDP. We have a spike now that looks almost like the spike that occurred during World War II. And these things, and James Madison in Federalist 43, he said the Constitution equally enables the general or the federal and the state governments to originate the amendment of errors as they may be pointed out by experience on one side or the other. I mean, Madison looked at this as a legitimate process. In fact, Madison cited it during the nullification crisis of 1832. We talked about the nullification crisis a lot several years ago. And so you see that, I mean, the founders had a concrete notion of what a convention was, and they saw it as something for the states to use if the federal government grows too much in power. In fact, the 17th Amendment, which was adopted in 1911, which provided for the popular election of senators. And that was a goal of the progressive movement in the early 20th century to make that happen. And that did a lot, that changed the dynamics of federalism significantly, because when senators were appointed by state legislatures, they represented the state. They had the idea of what the states needed, more so in their mind. And that was one of the balances of federalism that the founders put into the Constitution. But the reason that passed is because they were one state away from an Article V convention. So Congress said, well, it's about to happen. We're going to go ahead and pass a constitutional amendment ourselves through the mechanism that Article V gives for Congress to do it. And so I had some concerns, but the great saving grace is this. Number one, if the federal judiciary did what it's supposed to do, it would restrain a runaway convention. But I don't have much faith in the federal judiciary anymore, I'm afraid. But the number one, dynamic in here that I do have faith in is the 3/4 ratification requirement. If it really is a runaway, goofy convention, number one, you couldn't get such a diverse group from all the states together and come up with a runaway, goofy thing, I don't think. But even if you did, the 3/4 ratification requirement is such a high threshold. I have some faith that it would not be result in a runaway convention actually getting something implemented into law. So that's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Could the subcommittee chair, and I know there are others that want to be heard, subcommittee chair has got to lead. If there is a willingness to proceed, we're going to have to adjourn here just at around 5 or so anyway. Is there a willingness to move to a vote? All right, Senator from Richland moves to recommit to the subcommittee. No, you can only move one at a time unless you ask unanimous consent. All right, Senator from Richland asks unanimous consent. Objections noted. Senator from Aiken, what?
So we're not moving to a vote on his?
Yeah, on the first one. The motion is on S-198 to recommit. All right, those in favor of recommitting, please raise your hand. All right, all those opposed? By a vote of 15 to 7, the motion fails. Now the motion is for favorable report of the subcommittee. All those in favor on 198. All those in favor of favorable report to the full Senate, please raise your hand. All right. All those opposed? By a vote of 13 to 8, the bills with minority voted present. All right, voted 13 to 8 with one present. In a minority report, the bill will be reported favorable to the resolution will be reported favorable to the full Senate. You know, a lot of what was said earlier about the different resolutions, my view of it is one is sufficient. Now, I may be wrong. I don't see why to send to the floor 3 resolutions calling for a constitutional convention. Well, it's not a matter of where you. I mean, I favor all 3 of them, but I'm just suggesting to you that this one 198 appears to me to cover it. It's going to be somewhat redundant in terms of putting them out on the calendar when you can do with 198 what you would do with the other 2. So I just say that, Senator from Spartanburg.
Mr. Chairman, all due respect, I'd like to have a vote on them because the especially 31, if we could.
I mean, we can send them out, but, if y'all insist, Senate Bill, what? Senate Bill 30, Senate Bill 30 is, it's the balanced budget amendment, which is in S 98.
I'm fine with just a vote on 31, because it's not spelled out on 31.
So
30 is
we're
listed.
on, that's the next one on the agenda, so we got to take it up. If we're gonna proceed with the agenda, there's not a motion to.
I move to recommit 30 then.
You move to recommit 30, all right? All those in favor of recommitting 30, please raise your hand.
You said the other one hadn't.
No. We'll send all three of them out. All right.
I was saying back to subcommittee, I moved that we just let the last vote and the minority report go for 30.
All right. Is there objection? Hearing none so ordered, will you object? You'd like to vote for, okay, all right.
With Senator McElveen changing his vote, I moved that we.
Anyone else interested in changing your vote?
14.
Hearing none, without objection, you change yours and it would be 14 to 7.
15 to
Sir?
7. 15 to 7.
15 to. All right. All right, by a vote of 15 to 6, and a minority report on S30, same vote on 31. All right, Senator, you object. All right, we'll have a vote. All right, those in favor of S31,
Are we gonna have any debate on 31 before we vote on it?
don't look like it. I mean, we're about out of time if you want to. I mean, it's going to be a minority report. This is one of those votes that you, if you vote against it, you're going to be perceived as supporting same-sex marriage. And I guess that's what the thought is for voting to send it out and put it on the calendar.
Chairman, or you might, just offering a contrary view, you might be voting against it because we haven't decided that issue in the United States yet, and maybe we need to wait until, trust the process and wait on that before we initiate.
No, I can promise you, there will be somebody that will use this vote to say, you're in favor of same-sex marriage.
It's not reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we're insisting on a vote. Senator from Sumter.
And for the good of the audience here and the general public, you know, they probably don't have the same spreadsheet that's sitting in front of all of us right now, but if you look at the spreadsheet we have on 198, 30, and 31, you know, my understanding is it takes 34 states to approve this process in order to do a convention. Am I correct?
It does.
So if you look at S 198, I think 3 states have passed that. What it says, what I have in front of me is that 26 states have proposed something. I don't know if some of those have failed, some of those are pending or what. That adds up to 29 by my math. There's still 5 short. You look at S 30, it looks like 25 states have passed something. 4 states, including us, have something pending. And again, in any case, you're still 5 states short. You look at S 31, there's 1 been proposed in Alabama. So I mean, there's no groundswell behind 31 that you could say was there for 30 and 198, but I think the public ought to be aware of that.
Oh, you do?
And that could happen.
That's gonna really help.
We're not gonna get
That's
away
gonna
without
really-
voting on it.
Yeah, don't like we're gonna get around not voting on
Mr.
it.
Chairman,
Go ahead,
I
Senator.
was on the subcommittee, I've already voted on 31, but I do know, if anybody hasn't, I know that the chairman of the subcommittee said earlier in this hearing that he had an amendment for 31.
He withdrew it.
He withdrew, okay.
He withdrew it. Well, again, it's gonna go out on the calendar just to sit there. I mean, it's not going anywhere.
Chairman,
Senator from Charleston.
cannot recall, based on the rules, what is a more superior vote, but I would move to carry over 31 at this time.
All right, the motion is to carry over. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion's carried over. All right.
I'd like, for the record, and anyone else that wants, I'd like to be recorded as voting no on the carryover.
It's not, yeah, it was not a dispositive motion. It was just you feel free.
Okay.
All right. Well, no, we've got one last bill. It's
Mr.
a
Chairman.
general bill.
Mr. Chairman,